My name is Lori Lee Binstock, and you're listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. What the hell is a Trauma Survivor Thriver, you ask? Let me give a little background about myself and why I've started this podcast. I am a victim of childhood sexual abuse by my father, and I kept that secret and lived with the guilt and shame for more than 20 years. It almost killed me. This trauma took place in my early adolescence and sent me into a downward spiral of self-harm, suicide attempts, substance abuse, hypersexual behavior, and abortion, and just risky behavior into adulthood. My guest today knows exactly what I'm talking about. Matthew John Bocchi, author of the forthcoming book, Sway. Sway is the first memoir to be published by a child of a 9/11 victim. After your father's death on September 11th, 2001, you were on a mission to find out exactly what happened to him. That actually sent you down a rabbit hole, which led to the sexual abuse.
So I was 9 years old when my dad passed away. Inevitably, I have an uncle who had been grooming me for about a year or two prior.
You lived with the guilt and shame of sexual abuse by this uncle. So at such a young age, you had to deal with this horrific trauma of losing your dad in such a just horrific way. What did that do to you mentally?
In my opinion and in my experience, when it happens at the hands of a family member, it makes it so much harder to come forward, and it's so easy to believe that it's your fault and that you allowed it to happen. I thought one of two things consistently on a daily basis. The first being I was going to die a drug-related death, either an overdose or get killed in a bad deal. I would never have confessed to what had happened to me as a kid with the sexual abuse. And being able to get on the other side of both of those situations seemed like something that would never happen, and yet it did. And so my message would be to try to hold on to as much hope as you can. And even when you start to feel it diminish, hold on to that last little bit of it and hope and just pray that you can get through it. Because you can. And I did.
Joining me today is Melissa Hoppmeyer, Chief Prosecutor of Family Violence in the Special Victims Unit at Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office. Melissa is also a survivor of sexual assault herself.
When I was a freshman in college at GW, George Washington University, I went out with some friends and had a little bit too much to drink, unfortunately. And I called a person I thought was my friend, who I knew hadn't been drinking because they were athlete on campus, and asked him to come and get me. And, like many survivors, the rest of the night is very blurry for me. And so I just remember bits and pieces of it, but I do remember waking up, not remembering what happened, and being unclothed in my bed and just being really scared.
You obviously were vulnerable and you were taken advantage of. And I'm sure you know this, but it's not your fault. You are allowed to enjoy life at college and drink. It's not okay for someone else to assault you.
It's taken me a lot of years to get to that point. And a lot of times, telling the survivors that I help now and it's kind of like reaffirming it to myself.
Joining me today is Katherine McGibbon, advocate and a trauma survivor of human trafficking. She is also the founder of 1211, an organization birthed from her experience and passion to help communities combat sex trafficking and provide resources for other survivors.
This charming individual that I have grew to know, he turned into like a monster. He was unrecognizable. It was just terrible how he was belittling me, and he had other women there, other girls there, and it was almost like I was introduced into this life without warning. It was like an outer body experience is how I explain it, because it happened so quickly. Before I knew it, there were men coming to the room. He had taken some pictures of me, and the intent was to post them. And then there were men coming to the room, and I was forced to do whatever they said, perform whatever sex acts they requested. I knew the term prostitution, but I did not know the term trafficking. Typically, people that are being trafficked do not know that they are being trafficked.
What can we as a community, what can law enforcement, what can people in government do to stop human trafficking?
There are multiple answers to that, and I think we all can play our part. So there's laws that need to be changed. There's funding that is needed for organizations that are in this fight. There are schools that need to be educating our children. There are churches that need to be educated, communities that need to be educated and take a stand on a local level, all the way up to the federal level. And so I believe that just by learning about it is step number one. Don't be afraid to learn about this scary thing called human trafficking. The Epstein case is not just the first case. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of victims still out there that need our help.
Joining me is Melissa Dobbs, founder and executive director of the Metropolitan Fine Arts Center in Alexandria, Virginia. Melissa also works with Child Help, one of the largest nonprofit organizations dedicated to the prevention and treatment of child abuse in the nation. And I want to get into the amazing work you're doing with them, but before we do, I wanted to talk about your story.
When I was 12 years old, I was sexually assaulted by a stranger who followed me home from a grocery store. And then for the next couple of weeks, he was kind of courting me and getting to know me at this grocery store that my family frequented. And one day I was home sick from school and I got a knock on the door and he was at my door. One thing led to another and a sexual assault happened on that day. But at the moment when it was happening, I didn't think that it was a sexual assault. I thought that that was a normal, appropriate way that a man would treat a young woman. And little did I recognize when I was 12 years old that a 24-year-old man was not appropriately doing that to you. So I really didn't tell anybody anything, kind of kept it a secret because I thought my mom would be mad because I let a stranger in my house. And I was embarrassed to tell them. I was worried that I would get in trouble.
What did this do to you mentally?
Over the next 3 to 6 months, I started to develop a pretty severe eating disorder. I became bulimic, and it was the only way that I could handle the emotions and the feelings of abandonment that I felt. I felt like I was used and abandoned.
What is your advice you would like to give to others who are struggling with their own demons and maybe their own trauma that they haven't addressed?
Never give up. Never give up. Life is always better than death.
Mm-hmm.
Seek help, seek guidance, find somebody who can help you.
My therapist said that being in treatment already made me a survivor of trauma. At the time, the idea of thriving seemed like a lofty goal. I was okay with the idea of just surviving, but here I am, a trauma survivor thriver with a little more healing to do. I believe it's the journey from a place of being a victim where the emotions and the pain from the trauma are still embedded in your life, even though the event is over, to then realizing that healing and recovery is a choice, facing it and choosing change and growth. I believe thriving is what happens when you realize there is much more to life than just surviving. For me, thriving was finding a purpose. Throughout this podcast series, I'll be divulging a little bit more about myself, so I hope you stick around and maybe find your purpose. I'm Lori Lee Benstock, and thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Take care.